All right. Good morning, folks. I imagine people are still filtering in a little bit. It is Friday morning, but people aren't here to see me talk. So I'm going to do my overview now, and then we'll jump right into the real panel. Welcome, everybody. Happy Friday. Welcome to the second week of our conference, Building Back Smarter. And just to remind you all, we are on Twitter at #BARI2021. So please, if you want to join the conversation there, please do. So this is our second week. For those who missed it, last week we had a great conversation between former Speaker of the House of Representatives in Massachusetts, Robert DeLeo, and Adrian Walker, the Globe columnist. If you missed it, it's up on our YouTube channel. You can go watch it there as if it were live last Friday. And today we have another full Friday. And another one next week as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about what's going to happen this week in a moment. A reminder that next week is kind of our 10th anniversary celebration. We'll have a keynote conversation between folks who have been involved with BARI both since the beginning and more recently about where we go in the next decade with research policy collaboration here in Greater Boston. And then I want to announce now, and we'll announce it by email later today as well. We have confirmed we're going to have a fourth week of the conference on May 21st. It is going to be only a keynote, so at the same time, 9:30 to 10:45. It's going to be titled Research Policy Under a New Mayoral Administration. And what it is going to be is exactly what it sounds like. It's going to be a conversation with the mayoral candidates. We have candidates Barros, Asabi George, and Santiago, all committed, as well as Councillor Campbell, all committed to join us on that Friday. And so we're looking forward to that conversation. And it's going to be moderated by Philip Martin, a great investigative journalist from WGBH. And we're really looking forward to that conversation. That should be a lot of fun and a great opportunity for the research policy community to engage with the mayoral candidates about their priorities for data, research, and policy when and if they become mayor. So with that said, today, our keynote is on national lessons. And I think, as I mentioned last week when we got started, we're taking advantage of Zoom to full advantage, right? Traditionally, most of our speakers, if not all of our speakers, are Boston-based because this is a Boston-based conference. But this year, we really saw the opportunity to bring in experts from around the country who are doing the kinds of things that matter to Boston, that we here in Boston are trying to do or thinking about doing or hoping we're doing, but that we have much to learn. And we have much to learn from experts like those who we have joining us here today. Now, I'm not going to go into too much depth on the speakers themselves. I want to leave that to the moderator, but we will learn today about a consortium on education research, the question of resilience in a multi-jurisdictional context, and also the idea of how ubiquitous or everywhere tech, as it were, in community settings has both benefits and pitfalls that need to be navigated with communities. Now, all of these are things, as you can tell, that are relevant to Boston, that we care about here and that we're tangling with ourselves. And I could opine forever, but I'm going to leave that to the panel. So with that, I'm going to introduce the moderator, and then I will stand down and we'll have our conversation for the morning. So our moderator, Dan Correa, he is currently the acting president of the Federation of American Scientists, and he is also the founder and director of the Day One Project. Now, I've known Dan since 2015. I met him for the first time when he was assistant director for innovation policy at the White House Office of Science and Tech Policy under the Obama administration. And at that time, he and a few co-conspirators invited a bunch of city-university partnerships from around the country to a conversation in DC. Essentially, the goal was to catalyze a learning community around the use of data and technology to improve lives of local communities, which probably sounds familiar if you're here right now. And the product of that was the Metro Lab Network, which is now an international collaborative of over 30 city-university partnerships, and not all that coincidentally, a partner on this conference, and basically Dan's brainchild. And since then, Dan has held a bunch of different roles that continue to embody real leadership in science and technology policy. In 2017, he founded the Federal Innovation Council, supporting senior government officials to forge a more innovative, effective, tech-driven approach to governance. After that, he founded the Day One Project, where he's still director, which merges innovation with a democratic approach that incorporates a more diverse set of voices into the development and curation of actionable policies for improving the lives of all Americans. He was recently selected as the acting president of the Federation of American Scientists, which I noted. And the FAS provides science-based analysis of and solutions to protect against catastrophic threats to national and international security. Right. So now, Dan didn't found this organization, though we founded all the others that I've mentioned. It was started by the scientists who built the first atomic bombs in 1945. With the premise that scientists have the ethical obligation to ensure that the fruits of their labor benefit rather than harm humankind. So with that, in my estimation, Dan is nothing less than an innovator of the field of innovation, right? He's a meta-innovator, if you will, right? His work touches all of our domains, and it really gives shape to the data and tech-driven insights and products that we seek to generate. With that in mind, there's no better person to lead us through today's conversation, which is not only a conversation about resilience, about education, about community-based technology, but one about the ways that data and technology are going to continue to advance and shape our society. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the expert. Dan, take it away.
Dan, thanks for that generous introduction. I think you give me too much credit, but I am nonetheless really excited to be here. As you can hear from my background, at least, I've been interested in the idea of ensuring that we have technical expertise and research and evidence-based insights at the table, at the policymaking table. I think it's as true at the federal level, which is the work that I currently do, as it is at the state and local level, which I think we're here to talk about today. This is something that I think the work that Dan and this community, this audience has done is truly something that I have found inspiration in. It's something that led to our efforts to think about a broader network that became the Metro Lab network. And I think it's truly a model both across the country and across the world of how these sort of civic research partnerships can work. And so it's been a delight to be able to follow along with all the exciting partnerships and collaborations that have happened through this organization. I'm going to introduce our panelists in just a minute. I thought it would be useful to provide just a very brief context setting for this conversation of my own before I do that. I think as I mentioned, I'm working on policy at the federal level. And I think that the dynamics at the federal level, which have shifted tectonically, are important context for thinking about some of what is happening at the local level. I think there's a whole set of us that are passionate about brokering better local and regional collaborations, advancing place-based federal policies, whether it's on technology and innovation, or housing, equity, climate, et cetera. And I think that, there's obviously a lot of news and a lot of legislation coming out of Washington. I think the thing that I'd offer up for this audience and this panel is just that I think we're at a dramatic moment of legislative opportunity. And I think the current administration, the Biden administration, has prioritized investments to redress longstanding challenges, racial inequities, to prioritize climate, and to drive economic recovery and inclusion, and ensure that we recover from a pandemic and get our kids back on track learning, right? And so the extent to which I think these priorities have become centered in the work of the federal government is cannot be overstated. I think it's incredibly important. And so what that means is agencies that you would not think have a climate mandate all have climate leadership now. Agencies that don't necessarily prioritize equity are now examining how every single funding stream might better actually integrate and make it primary. So I just wanted to lay that groundwork because I think what this means is that for this panel and this community, we are looking at an opportunity, I think, for a pretty dramatic influx of both dollars and attention on the issues that we're here to discuss. And I think there's real opportunity for us to think about what the research community's role is in ensuring that we both glean learnings, drive effective evidence-based policy, and actually ensure that this moment is fully taken advantage of. And so I think that's a good context for today's conversation. And we have three fantastic panelists to shed some light on the work that they're doing. But I encourage everyone to keep in mind sort of that broader dynamic as we go through. And as Dan said, each of these panelists brings a little bit of a unique perspective. We've got an example of multi-stakeholder collaboration to drive resilience in Miami. We've got an example of a long-standing research and education K-12 partnership to better understand what works in K-12 learning that I think is a thriving example. And then finally, we've got an example from Detroit of how to bridge the digital divide and do it in a community-driven way that I think is a powerful spotlight on some of the challenges that we face with respect to equity and inclusion. Okay, so with that, let me introduce our panelists, and then we're going to give them a chance to share a bit of their work and vision. And as I do this, with that framing at the top, I encourage folks, I think you've got instructions for the audience, you've got instructions for how to share questions. Please do so now. We want to make sure that this conversation is informed by what folks want to hear. So don't be shy. We will receive those on the back end and just be sure to sort of integrate them into the conversation to make sure that this is valuable and meaningful. Okay, so first up we have, and I'll introduce all three and then I'll throw it to Karina to kick us off. So first we have Karina Castillo. Karina is a resilience coordinator for the Miami-Dade County's Office of Resilience. She holds a master's of professional science degree in weather, climate, and society from the Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science at the University of Miami. And she's been recognized repeatedly for her work in this domain, driving effective partnerships from a whole array of actors in Miami to make progress on resilience. So she's been recognized as on GRIST's annual list of emerging green leaders known as the Fixers back in 2017, just for example. So we're excited to have Karina here with us today to share her perspective. Next up, we're gonna hear from Elaine Allensworth, who is the Lewis Sebring Director of the UChicago Consortium, where she has been leading an effort to conduct research on education policy and practice for 20 years. So she works, this is gonna sound familiar to many of those in the audience, she works with policymakers and practitioners to bridge research and practice, providing advice to researchers across the country and conducting research practice partnerships. She's recognized in her field as an expert in students' educational attainment, school leadership, and school improvement, which is much of what her research focuses on. So we're excited for Elaine to be with us today to talk about some of what she sees in her work in Chicago, in particular with the Chicago school system, and the insights from their model and what works so well and how it might inform how we think about this work. Finally, we've got Katie Hearn with us today, who is director at the Detroit Community Technology Project, where Katie leads their work related to bridging the digital divide and addressing a whole number of technology-driven issues that have resonance with the community in Detroit, particularly underserved communities, people of color, and it is truly has a fantastic set of initiatives to share with us today. Her background is actually in the tech world. She's held a number of roles at a number of different firms that led to her work as a community leader in Detroit. So we are really excited to hear from Katie as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Karina. And I wanted to invite the panelists as they share a bit of their thoughts. I wanted to also prod them with one question, which is, as you discuss some of your work and the model that you've undertaken, what is one thing that when you set out to do this that you wish you had known at the beginning? So maybe each of you might be willing to leave us with, at the end of your remarks, at least one insight that we can chew on and may guide our discussion. Okay, with that, let me turn to Karina to take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Dan. First of all, I'd like to thank Bari, both Diane's Metro Lab as well. And it's really a great honor to be here with my fellow panelists, Elaine and Katie this morning, and happy Friday. So good morning. I work in the Miami-Dade County Office of Resilience, and at the Office of Resilience in the county, we work to, drive innovative solutions, identify vulnerabilities, and most importantly to our work, collaborate and connect various partners and people in the community together to solve, our most urgent shocks and stresses in the community. And so we, shocks and stresses, we were part of the 100 Resilient Cities Network under the Rockefeller Foundation, and now are part of the Resilient Cities Network. So shocks and stresses is very much part of our everyday language. Part of my work within the office, I'm very fortunate to have 13 other colleagues in the office, but my work really focuses in on community engagement and outreach, with a particular focus on working with our with 34 municipalities in the county and with our institutions of higher learning in the community. And we have a long history. Back in 2014, we worked with the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact, which is a 4-county consortium working to address climate vulnerability and working together. And so they saw a tremendous need to partner with the university community in our own backyard. And so we signed a formal agreement in 2014 to work together. And so since then, there's been committees and groups that have met to not only inform us of the latest, climate indicators, what that means, downscaling that national research that's going on at, NOAA and all the other agencies, but to really tell us what's happening here to drive policy. But I think the most important accomplishment out of that partnership has been the development of localized regional sea level rise projections. And really that has become the landmark and has been adopted to really drive capital infrastructure planning in our community. So we're all using the same projections and all agreeing to use that in the long term. And I think that's really unique, and it's rippling throughout the state of Florida. So I think that's a great example. Now, fast forward a couple of years ago, we had Zika knocking on our door. It's a mosquito-borne disease that impacted, 2 of our very popular tourist destinations. And we didn't really have a lot of experience. I mean, we're tropical paradise, let's say, but we have mosquitoes, but this particular infectious disease hadn't really been in our neighborhood. So bringing together the chief resilience officers from the city of Miami, the city of Miami Beach, and the county worked together to bring university professors together and public health experts along with our Department of Health to try and sit together at the same table and come up with solutions and have a monitoring system that can tell us where to be most effective. Out of that really is when we joined the Metro Lab network. And since then, we've continued working together, but the most recent project is what we're calling the Little River to North Beach Resilience District. And with this project, we're working with Florida International University, the University of Miami, which is my alma mater, and Miami-Dade College, or local college that is the largest Hispanic serving institution in the country. And we're bringing together over 60 stakeholders, community members, like I mentioned, and professors from each of those institutions. And it's really impressive because it's a cross-cutting, they're developing cross-cutting metrics that are going to tell us if we're making progress on resilience. It's really hard to understand, when you're doing a project, what is the resilience dividend? I think that was something that at 100 Resilient Cities, we're constantly trying to figure out. And now with the Resilient Cities Network, the same. It's really hard to show that. And so with this development of this research framework, we're putting the best minds in our local community together, saying, all right, what are the metrics that we can measure when we're doing these projects? And it's not only infrastructure projects, I'm also talking about social infrastructure. And how can we, have the baseline, establish a baseline, and then measure that to see how we can learn from what the project that we're doing and how can we improve it. And this district that we're doing is really a cross section of our community. We're a very large urban community, but this has various social economic conditions across. I mean, if it even crosses our bay, Biscayne Bay, we have access options, we have transportation issues, I mean, flooding issues, septic systems in the same district. So it's a really interesting project that we're driving forward. We're just right now kind of refining the top, let's say 20 metrics that we're going to be looking at and seeing where we are. And then picking a couple projects that are going to be implemented in the next couple of years and using those same metrics. But more importantly, we're also looking at how those metrics can be applied to other projects that we're doing in our own office, whether it be our own sea level rise strategy, which obviously is our, what everybody thinks about when they think about Miami is sea level rise, but also with our mitigation, with our carbon mitigation efforts and with our recently released climate action strategy. So we're quite busy down here, but it's really interesting. It's been great to be along the ride. And one thing I think to answer Dan's question, one thing I wish I knew going into this is that it's, much like a county, a large county that, has multiple different departments, is in charge of a lot. I think that I underestimated that same, let's say that same framework in the university system. I wish I had known that it wasn't going to be as easy as just saying like, yes, let's talk to this university, let's all connect and let's be all on the same page. Let's come together for resources to better serve our community. Breaking down those silos, I think is what I wish I would have known.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you so much, Karina. What a great tour of at least 3 different projects that I think we can dive into, as well as an insight about how to find the front door at our research partners, something that is obviously going to be familiar to many in the audience. What important work. Okay, now why don't we turn to Elaine to hear her initial thoughts for the panel. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Karina. That was really interesting. Can't wait to have further conversation with you and with Katie. So I'm the director of the University of Chicago Consortium on School Research. And this is a research practice partnership that's existed with the Chicago Public Schools since 1990. So we've been around a long time. Our partnership is, with the district. So we're, a university institute that has a partnership with the school district, but our mission is to serve the broader community in Chicago, to really support improvement in Chicago public schools, but not just through working with the district, but really by working with, a broad array of stakeholders, because, we all have to work together if we're going to improve students' experiences and outcomes in schools. And so we actively seek input from different perspectives. We have a steering committee that consists of people, from the Teachers Union and the Principals Association and the State Board of Education and nonprofits working all throughout the city. I'm sorry, do you hear the background noise?
All good.
Okay, good. Because, we believe that, the way that we can most help is not by just doing work for the district, but by really answering those broader questions and having a common, common framework for thinking about, school improvements and helping people to work together and work from evidence. So we retain independence in what's published, but we share everything that's coming out well in advance with the district. So there are no surprises. We have a strict no surprises rule. And that way we can work with district leaders on solutions before findings are public, and we can work with other stakeholders so people kind of know what's coming and they can work on whatever it is. And so that when the research comes out, it's supportive, right? So people can say, oh, we know about this. And so we're going to work on, this is our solution, we've come out for it. It's not a gotcha kind of thing, which is, I think different from the ways a lot of research works. District and city leaders, I think, really value the partnership, and they credit it with supporting large improvements in students' outcomes in Chicago public schools. Our research, working with folks in districts and in nonprofits, on figuring out what strategies are most important and effective. We've seen a rise in high school graduation rates of over 25 percentage points, from 53% of students graduating to 80% of students graduating. Not only do we have thousands of more students graduating, but those graduates have stronger achievements than graduates in the past. So higher ACT and SAT scores, more AP courses, more course passing, a doubling in the students obtaining four-year college degrees, reduction in suspension rates, improvements in feelings and safety. Chicago's at the 97th percentile in the country in terms of test score gains. So we've seen a lot of improvement in Chicago public schools. And again, that's through this partnership focused on evidence and data and research. So we're focused on one district, Chicago, but with an eye to answering questions that are going to be relevant, not just in Chicago, but across the country, which also means, to Chicago, in the future. So we try to avoid a lot of really kind of narrow policy evaluations, because, you find out something worked or it didn't work, and people always say, well, we don't do it that way anymore anyway, right? And so trying to answer the big questions and building knowledge over time, back and forth between research and practice. And we do this in basically 4 different ways. One, we try to measure the things people think are important and then track progress over time. So, people think it's important for students and teachers to feel safe in schools, or for principals to be instructional leaders. So we develop, ways to measure those, and then we track them. So we have annual surveys we can track over time, and then we can see how different policies influence those, what's going on in school. So we can see, for example, new policies around, just preventing schools from suspending students actually led to greater safety in schools, right? Because we can track those things. Our research showed that the high school transition year, 9th grade, was critical for high school graduation, and then also for college readiness. And so we developed metric. No one had ways of measuring what was happening in 9th grade, right? Everyone was just measuring what happened at the end of high school. So we developed metrics that we now track over time, so that we can see, what is the progress the district is making, and then also what are the effects of different policies and practices. And so we develop metrics. We then really figure out what matters most for different outcomes. And, it's really important not just to say this, but also to say, you don't need to do that, because we have to get things off of people's plate, not just put things on people's plates. So we can say, oh, what matters for college readiness? It's actually, students' grades and students' engagement in their classes. That's more important. Test scores, not actually that important, right? And so thinking about where you put your priorities. And then, as I was saying, when we do evaluations of what's happening, we try to understand how they're happening, rather than just, did they work, did they not work? And then we always try to provide data back to schools, or help the district provide data to schools, because we can come up with a research study, but people will always say, but my school is different, right? Every school is unique. And so, you want to have that data so that schools can see themselves in the research, say, does this apply to me? And then also so that they can, make their own goals and strategies and monitor progress over time. And we've been doing this work for many, many years. I will say, though, it was funny hearing Karina say breaking down silos, because there's one thing I feel like we're constantly having to remind ourselves is, to constantly say, who else needs to know? because, we can work with, certain departments in the school district, but there may be other departments that it is also relevant for, other stakeholders in the community that the work is relevant for. And if you don't have everyone kind of, if we're not working with everyone, then it's going to be hard to build consensus. And so just constantly saying, who else should we be talking to?
Awesome. Elaine, thank you for unpacking the model with such lucidity. It sounds to me, just that there is this fundamental benefit of the longstanding relationship that you've established, which is brokered on trust, allowing for insights to be delivered in ways that they're most likely to be adopted, which I think is obviously a very exciting model. So thank you for sharing that with us. Now let's hear from our third panelist, Katie, about the work that she's been leading in Detroit. And she won't be able to show us her video, which will give you goosebumps about how awesome it is. So we'll have to do that later. But Katie, we're excited to hear from you.
I'm excited to be here and trying to snap myself out of listening mode because this is already terribly interesting. I'm really happy to be here with you both, Elaine and Karina. Yes, thank you for having me. I'm Katie Hearn. I serve as the director at Detroit Community Technology Project, which, our mission is really to use and build technology that is rooted in community need. We are born from the now 10-year organizing history of the Detroit Digital Justice Coalition, which is a group that formed across movement areas to take advantage of broadband technology opportunity funds. A successful bid that led to the creation of, community computer labs and media making workshops, all centered around how to engage those at the forefront of various struggles within our communities to really use technology to start generating solutions that were immediately relevant to them. So, by and large, fast forward to today, we hold very clearly that, digital and data equity is rooted in racial equity and that communication is a fundamental human right. So in our work, we very much try to always maintain community at the center, but to understand how we can effectively help to transform the relationships, primarily of those that have been historically marginalized from access, use, or governance of technology, how we transform that relationship into one where folks are not mere consumers or targets of technology, but are instead producers and governors and owners of technology. So we do that primarily in two ways, one of which is built from our partnerships in developing the digital stewardship model, which is an approach that stemmed from partnerships with the Open Technology Institute, Allied Media Projects, and others to develop a training platform to essentially equip residents to build and maintain community mesh networks to serve as communications infrastructure. Today, that looks like the Equitable Internet Initiative, which is actually using the digital stewardship model to instead build fixed wireless gigabit connections that are shared at a neighborhood level. So we now have 3 anchor organizations that DCTP is in collaboration with on EII that is now powering networks in 4 going on 5 neighborhoods and smaller cities within the city of Detroit. And really the priorities are to serve those that we know have been disinvested from over the years. Now, of course, access to technology and communications infrastructure is one issue and one that we have a lot to say about, but we're also very much aware that, folks aren't necessarily equipped and understanding of the larger climate of extraction once they are online and how that relates to life offline as well. So our data justice work has primarily been rooted in creating opportunities for everyday people to learn about that climate, to understand their data bodies and how their everyday movements might impact their lives on grander scales, but also how we can essentially empower ourselves to be safer online and to have greater control generally over our data bodies, and how we can kind of take back some of that agency. So our work here has very much focused also on the surveillance state in the city of Detroit, where we have seen our public safety dollars very much poured into things like surveillance, facial recognition technology, traffic cameras, et cetera, where at the same time we are closing schools, rec centers, roping off basketball courts, and we are also known, of course, for water shutoffs in our state. So overall, it's our aim to demystify technology and to really use technology as a means to heal relationships, not only between neighbors, but also between neighbors in tech and neighbors and the planet. So we do seek to utilize alternative energies whenever possible. And while we're having these conversations about internet access, we're also having conversations about access to communication as a whole, access to our social fabrics that can sustain us during times of crises. So that kind of shows up in our digital stewardship program as well. So when you drill down to today, we're really looking at how our digital stewards are trained not only as community technologists who help to shape the integration of technology in their home neighborhoods, but also how they are community organizers and fulfilling different sorts of needs that really seek to uplift the humanity that is most critical here, no matter what kind of technology we're talking about. And I think, overall, when I hear the question, what did you wish that you knew? I came into this work actually through the Detroit Digital Justice Coalition, kind of fresh out of college. And it was astounding to learn about kind of the systemic disinvestment that was so prevalent here. And I think that what I wish I knew then was that although we were very adept at centering the voices of those that were most impacted by the solutions and trying to lift them up to the forefront of generating solutions, what I didn't know, or what I've been understanding more and more over the years, is that there is a sorely lacking understanding of how we got here, how we got to the position that we're in, where we consistently lead the nation as a worst connected city, how we consistently lead the nation in terms of polluted zip codes, and how we consistently lead the nation in terms of wrongful misidentifications and facial recognition technology, because we have a lacking policy with our local police department. So particularly last year, what really came to a head for me is that we have a lot of data. We have a lot of maps that very clearly tell the story of disinvestment. But what really rang the bell for me is that we don't really carry that forward as a racial analysis or analysis at all. So when we're talking about smart cities, when we're talking about innovation, when we're talking about future proofing and future readiness, we need to be talking about how we are rectifying the wrongs that have really been driven by capitalism and the desire to innovate and, I don't know, move fast and break things. So for me, I'm really interested in how innovation and technology can hold at the center the people that have consistently been most harmed or left behind.
Katie, thank you for sharing that perspective and the important work that you're doing. I want to actually probe on this a little further. So thank you to all our panelists for the intro comments. This is an exciting set of projects and perspective. I'm really excited to have this conversation. One note for the audience before we dive in. If you have a question, throw it in the Q&A in the chat at the bottom of your screen. We will integrate this into our conversation over the next half hour. I'm gonna now turn, here's what I'd like to do. I'll ask each one of you a question, but my goal would be that we'll start with Katie, and that the other two panelists will have a chance to weigh in on how they see this informing their work. And so Kate, I just want to pick up on the work that you're doing, that's how it's fundamentally community driven. So the work that you described to build out gigabit internet across neighborhoods that are just underserved because the incumbents are not providing internet, like that obviously I understand that project, incredibly important, upsetting that it would be necessary. For the work that you're doing where you're either trying to bridge the digital divide and help broker better understanding of tech, or sourcing community perspectives on surveillance and giving voice to those, what are the tools that you're using to both source perspectives and better understand the communities in which you're working? And how are you giving voice to that? How are you fighting that fight on surveillance? And so before you answer, I'm curious for all the panelists to think about how community perspectives are shaping the work that they're doing, because I think it's relevant in each case here. So Katie, if you will.
Yeah. So, I began by mentioning the Detroit Digital Justice Coalition because that group created Digital Justice Principles. The 4 tenets are access, participation, common ownership, and healthy communities. So that's really what we are grounding ourselves in every day, because at the root of it is understanding, what the relationships are that allow this work to happen. So although DCTP is convening a lot of different programs, we explicitly sought out relationships with trusted community anchor organizations that were already, serving communities in ways that were, either addressing the digital divide already, or were centering youth leadership and things like that. So, it's for us very important to understand, I think that trust factor that I heard earlier, maybe from Elaine, because what's most important is understanding that we have to meet people where they are. And to do that, you have to, have an authentic relationship and have ways for folks with different learning styles to engage. And so one thing that the DDJC actually created that we still do today with the DDJC and otherwise, is organizing discotheques, discovering technology. There are DJs, but by and large, this is a science fair style event that we, as a DDJC, we kind of go district by district in Detroit, when there isn't an active pandemic, to invite residents from that district to share their own expertise, because a tenet of this work is acknowledging that all of us are experts in something, and technology is not just hardware, software, algorithms. So discotheques have created not only a digestible, accessible way to share skills and tools, and even something as simple as, how strong is my password? But it's also a way for folks to actually engage in storytelling, to engage in mapping activities, and to really have an opportunity to access different types of resources that they might not otherwise know about. So this is, an instance where we very much seek to organize a space and to provide different types of inputs and output opportunities, because, it's again, incredibly important to have a space where folks feel safe and have an opportunity also to come away with some sort of information without feeling like, there's some sort of, charge to give something up. So, that's also a space where we're able to take time to explain what we mean by digital consent, for example, and the fact that you should, not have to always give up your left arm in order to use an app or something like that. So that's one example where we're trying to create a space where there's multiple opportunities for different types of engagement, different types of learning, but also a way to have critical conversations that are then, kind of driven through to different agencies in the city, so that you raise surveillance. And, that's a very standard example of letting people know that, hey, our city government spent a lot of money Here's, a community written news magazine that has all of these different perspectives from people that are from your neighborhood, from your city, from your background, explaining to you what maybe city council didn't want you to know or didn't know themselves. So we do have a focus also on media making, not only in terms of what we can produce in the way of zines or in the way of magazines or videos, but also how we can actually equip and enable folks to do that for themselves.
Okay, that is incredibly illuminating. Thank you, Katie. So I'll turn to Elaine next. On this question of sort of how is your work informed by these diverse bottoms-up perspectives? Is there an angle there that you're also tapped into to ensure that your work is resonating and meaningful across the community?
Yeah. As Katie was talking, I was thinking about the case of Chicago. I'm sure everyone's thinking about their own city. It's a very it's one of the most highly segregated cities, I think, in the country. If you look at the history of Chicago, it's a history of redlining and absolute violence to people who tried to oppose strict racial segregation. And we have as a result, we have communities that are very different, very racially distinct, economically distinct from each other, and a lot of mistrust and disinvestment in particular communities. And then that feeds into schools and how people view schools and view schools in different neighborhoods. And then we have a very active system of school choice, and that affects and how schools are rated, and where students send their schools, and or where parents send their students, and a lot of the district policies actually end up aggravating those differences, so that neighborhood schools in communities with a lot of disinvestment, will look poor on the ratings, even if they're doing a good job serving students, just because of the way the system's set up. And so the district is, district leadership is very aware of these patterns, and they have, for the first time ever, just a couple of years ago, they have now a chief equity officer that, they have an equity plan. We, in our work, we're very aware that a lot of our input, and if we look at the history of our organization, a lot of our input has come from kind of like the civic leadership in the city. So, the school district, heads of nonprofits that are kind of plugged in, and city leadership, unions, and we'll like intermittently working with parents and community groups. And so and we also at the University of Chicago is on the south side of Chicago. It has a history of not really engaging and supporting with the community. Again, the current leadership in the University of Chicago, really recognizes that the university should be really supporting and listening to community members on the south side of Chicago. And so, there is this kind of transformation that's happening and a figuring out, but we have a long way to go in terms of improving trust. And so, in our work now, we've kind of intermittently, worked with various groups, community groups, family groups. We're trying to figure out how do we do that on a really, in a very intentional way, because, really our work should be supporting families and communities in the city, supporting students in the city. We've always seen our work as kind of bridging these different political divides in the city. But really what we want to make sure is that our work is really giving voice and elevating the voices of students and parents. And, again, the district understands that, but, so that's taking, so we're figuring out different strategies of doing that well, in terms of always making sure, thinking about, we have steering committees, we have advisory groups. Who are we inviting to those advisory groups? Reaching out regularly to different groups to hear, what are the issues that you have concerns about? What is the take on your research? What more do you want to know? So that we can, make sure that our work is really meeting needs of the students and the families in the school district.
And I would imagine that, if you find that the ninth grade matters critically, there's a lot of ingredients for success in ninth grade that are outside the control of the school, obviously, right? It matters the context from which students are coming.
Yeah, and so we know ninth grade is really, really a critical time. I mean, that's a time where there's strategies you can do in schools, but also the way that schools are connected to communities and to families and nonprofits really can make a huge difference there. And so, figuring out, elevating examples of what you can do. And we've seen some schools make huge progress. And yeah, I do believe that a big part of that is the communication and the relationships with families, so that everyone's on the same page and working together, as well as changing, thinking about how schools are structured to really support students in the transition.
Great, thank you. And my next question is going to be for you, Elaine, but let me first get to Karina to answer this one. So you're on notice. So Karina, Katie mentioned that sometimes our city council members themselves do not understand the complexity of these issues that affect communities. Now, when I think of resilience in Miami, I think about sea level rise, guilty. But you mentioned a much broader mandate that includes a whole variety of other factors that touch communities. How do you ensure that government in your work is in touch with these issues that we're talking about?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dan. And it's okay to be guilty of only thinking about sea level rise. We're a very diverse community. I mean, what you see on TV and the pictures that you see are exactly what's behind me. My, beaches, party, and especially with spring break that we just had down in Miami Beach, it was national news. But, we're also, we're almost 3 million people in a county. And unfortunately, we don't have a very diversified economy, which means that most of the people that look like me work in the hospitality and tourism industry. And that means low wage jobs. And so oftentimes we have, the United Way puts out a report called the Alice Report that looks at the percentage of people that are basically working poor. And are one disaster away from not being able to survive. And that percentage is 60%. So we have a huge income inequality issue in Miami-Dade County. We have a huge, language barrier as well. That we don't speak just one language down here. We speak Spanish, English, and Haitian Creole. So ensuring that we're connecting on different languages, that we're respecting cultural beliefs and cultural traditions, but also listening to the community. And I think that's one thing in our work at the Office of Resilience that we really try and do. We try and center that community voice. And not only that, we're not only putting the equal weight on the research and the data, but also, putting that on the same level with community experience. And it's hard because sometimes we don't understand, I've lived here for a long time, but a lot of my coworkers have come from other places. So it's really hard to, even myself, I'm in one corner of the county to understand, some of the wrongdoings that have happened to other community members. It's a big county, and even within our own office, we don't know the wrongs that have been done from on behalf of our county or the municipalities in which people live. But I would say that storytelling, I think, in the example of the Resilience District, what we're doing is, some of my coworkers have literally walked the pavement, done door hangers, have gone door to door. What's your experience with flooding? What's your experience with heat? Where do you work? What opportunities do you think you need? How do you get there? And try to answer those questions and really get at, how do you feel today? What's your mental health? Do you feel healthy? Do you feel healthy today? Do you feel access? And I think that, the pandemic has really also helped us further understand how important it is to understand that community choice and community voice should be at the same level as research, data, and also access.
Karina, that is inspiring to hear that level of intentionality around these issues. I wish it were more common. I wish we were funding state and local governments to do more of this work because I think it's so obviously critical to center these communities. So that's an exciting story to share. Okay, I'm going to turn next to Elaine. Elaine, this audience, this research community wants to hear from you. They want to hear from an academic to talk about this amazing collaboration you have. So I'm going to meld a couple of questions together. So my question, and then two we've gotten from the audience. So my question is sort of global about this collaboration you have, and it is, who is in the driver's seat? So I could imagine a whole variety of interesting and important research questions that you could be examining. But I also would imagine that some of these would be less efficacious, like figuring out if like an entirely different school model would work, is like A, hard to test, and B, not something that you're necessarily going to get a lot of traction on. So I'm curious about sort of like how you determine that. And so I think within that broad question, we had a couple of questions from the audience that I wanted to highlight. I mean, one, how do you deal with transition? So if there's a new superintendent, how do you make sure they're bought in? What's the brokering of a long-established relationship with new actors in place? And then two, people are interested in this no surprise policy. So, so let's just say that even if it's not a surprise, it's super bad news. So like, what's the way in which you ensure that you have a good working relationship when functionally your customer would be quite displeased with public airing of some terrible insights? So I think those kind of hang together, and hopefully that's not too hard of a complex question for you to grapple with.
Yeah, no. And if I forget one, then just remind me. But yeah, so there are a million things we could potentially be working on in terms of our research. So what we do is we set a 5-year research agenda, and we actually just went through the process, and we just have a new agenda that we just finalized in January. And we basically take a year to go, to talk to various stakeholder groups across the city to find out what are the issues that, people feel like are really pressing. And so, we met with, obviously we met with central office folks, a couple different groups of central office. We met with parents, we met with teachers at the teachers union, we met with principals, we met with students, we met with other researchers at other institutions in Chicago and other places. And we looked at, goals the district had put out, and, together then we kind of shaped a broad research agenda, say, this is where we think we want to go over the next 5 years. And so, and then we have the steering committee that consists of folks from lots of different places, in the Chicago education community, that then helps us with that too. And so we have this kind of like broad framework that helps us guide. Now we know that 5 years from now, probably issues are going to be completely different, and so we consider it a guide. But if there, if things are emerging, like we have research findings that are suggesting going in a particular way, or that there's a big change in the district and we need to study it, it doesn't mean we won't study it. It just means we're going to think really carefully, and so that helps us kind of guide what we're doing. And in terms of big change, like there have been a number of things that have resulted in big system changes, but that comes from this kind of building of knowledge over time and going back and forth. So, I think we're always trying to think of the long game. And again, like who else needs to be involved? Who else needs to know? That helps us, to like kind of guide our next step of research. We've been through 11 different district leaders. And there was a period where every year there was basically a new district leader. Unfortunately, our beloved CEO of district schools has just announced that she's not returning. She's not going to renew her contract, so we're going to be going through another turnover, which is very challenging. Obviously, it's very challenging for everyone in schools because every time there's a turnover at the top, it tends to mean there's also turnover in the mid-level, completely new policies, and a new resetting. For us, it means, we have to just really reach out and continually, try to establish trust, make new relationships. That's another reason it's important, I think, to see our stakeholders as really not just the school district, but the broader community. Because what happens is district leader comes in, they have their own priorities, they have their own thoughts about research and data. But by talking to people in the community, they'll say, oh, you really should work with the consortium. We've had, so for example, the 9th grade on track work, has resulted in huge improvements in high schools. We did have, with some of these turnovers, I remember one administration, they're like, 9th grade grades, 9th grade attendance, 9th grade grades, that's not what's really important. It's all about college readiness, like not making that connection. And like, oh, I've got my people at this other university outside of Illinois, that I've worked with in the past, I remember going to a meeting at the central office that was called by principals and network chiefs to come and say, here's the research that shows what this has done. And, through all of these, different stakeholders coming together to say, look at what we've done in this district, they were able to keep, the data flowing that could support that work on the 9th grade transition. And, eventually, when you see the value, people will come around to say, oh, yes, this is useful. And I do think the no surprises rule is really important in that, a lot of times research is done, in this, again, this kind of disconnected way, or, this kind of gotcha way. And so there is a lot of fear and concern. And that doesn't go away completely ever. Whenever you're, allowing research to be done, you're taking a huge risk. And even if we come out with a study that says, something that's been going on in the district that's worked incredibly well, but here's some ways to improve it, probably the press will focus on what's not going right in their headlines. And so, it's always a risk. So you've got to have those relationships. And I will say, it's hard for, a lot of times it's hard. Sometimes we've had to put out research that has been very, very hard for the district and for the city. I think the hardest one, when we put out a study about the city closed 50 schools at once in 2013, and it was devastating for the city. And that was a hard study for us to get started, but we felt like it was really important to understand the consequences of that. And then, and we really wanted to put out the evidence to say, here's what happened. People were saying, oh, this is going to be good for the city, good for schools, good for other people saying this is terrible, whatever. We wanted to put out the evidence so that we could know going forward what happened. It turned out to be mostly really devastating and not good news. And it was really hard for the district. But having that evidence out, if we don't put out the bad news, then people aren't going to believe the good news. Like we have to be able to be neutral brokers. And I think when you have people who have been around a long time, they start to understand that it's important, to be able to share the bad news so that you can move forward and work. And as long as the district has had time to think about what they could do differently, when the research comes out, they have a response. And for us, it's before the research comes out that we feel like we can a lot of times have the biggest impact, because that's when people can really process findings and think about what they could do differently without the glare of the spotlight, on them.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing and for capturing all three of those questions. One thing it raises for me is this question of just research communications, because it's one thing to be sharing insights about schools and learning. It's another thing to be sharing insights publicly about your schools in your community and specifically what's going wrong. And the nuances of whatever academic insights are delivered can often be lost, especially in a contentious topic like schools, what's working, students. Do you think a lot about public communications in your work when you deliver it?
Yeah, it's critically important. But it's one of those things you can never do enough. Like I always feel like we should be doing more in terms of, again, like talking to people ahead of time, hearing different perspectives on the work, making sure that we're putting out the findings in ways that are not going to be harmful in any way, but actually are going to be constructive and and promote productive dialogue. And also, like the way that so it's like having conversations with all the right people, listening to different perspectives, and then the way that we put out research, trying to put it out in ways that will reach, different audiences. Yeah. It's a lot, and again, I feel like we never feel like we do as much as we should, but we're always like really we spend a lot of time thinking about how we're putting our work out.
It's something I think we neglected our peril. So it's interesting to hear about that approach. We're going to have to bring it home pretty soon here. I'm going to turn to Karina for a question, and then I think hopefully wrap up with one for Katie as we wrap. So Karina, I'm actually curious. I was going to ask you something similar to what we just discussed with Elaine, which is you mentioned one of your projects is about developing metrics, working with the academic community and engaging them, or at least as I understand it. How do you ensure that that you are in the driver's seat and we're not? I think one of the perils of academic collaborations, if I can say this in a safe space, is that academics pursuing questions that they find most interesting and compelling to further their research. So what are you learning and what are you seeing, and how is that informing and driving resilience in your world?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and definitely it's not something that we figured out completely, but I can say that with right now the particular project, the Little River to North Beach Resilience District project, is that we have a guiding framework, which is our Resilient 305 strategy developed under Rockefeller and 100 resilient cities. And so there's 59 specific action items in that strategy. And that strategy, of course, is informed by, community surveys and community priorities, informational interviews with elected officials that serve, our county. But I think the fact that we have that as our guiding principle, and the fact that we're looking at just a small portion of our county is really what's helping us kind of keep focused, right? We know the shocks and stresses. So our metrics need to reflect measuring how we're addressing those. So we know it's income inequality, access to technology, of course, the climate impacts, and then, the shocks like the pandemic. So we've also, we're always have that framework in mind, how we're, our research and our metrics and our collaboration needs to attack or figure out or make a difference in those shocks and stresses, right? So that's the mindset. And I think keeping that as a kind of overarching guide to what we're doing it's what's helped us stay focused and kind of make sure that what we're doing is of mutual benefit to both our university partners and our college, as well as local government.
That's great, Karina. It sounds like you and your team are very effective at herding cats across various domains, whether it's the academic community or various governments. Hats off to you. What a challenge and what an important one. Okay, we've got just maybe 2 or 3 minutes left. Let's do this. Katie, I'm going to ask you a question, and then maybe we can, after your answer, I can give our other panelists a chance to just maybe, if they want to leave the group with one thought and a sentence or two, that they can close out. So Katie, we got a question from the audience that resonates with me. So I wanted to ask some form of it, which is, how do you think about the sustainability of the infrastructure that you're building? If we were to fast forward to 5 years, who's funding this? How is this intersecting with public sector partners? You mentioned BTOP as part of the foundation. That was a federal program from 10 years ago. We may have a BTOP 2.0. Right. So what is your sort of sustainability strategy, and how do you ensure that you stay rooted in the community?
Okay, so this is definitely a response that requires a few more minutes.
Sorry.
But no, to be frank, this is a question we grapple with regularly. Like I don't purport to have the answer, but we do view, sustainability of the tech as also a reflection of how we are meeting the stated need of the community. So we try to foster, enough of, I guess, a rooted autonomy. So let me just give an example, because we're thinking about how we can essentially nurture neighborhood level ISPs. But I want to be clear, like, we are not aiming to become a Comcast. Like, it's very, very clear to us that we have network priorities of folks that aren't necessarily, aren't necessarily. Our priorities are folks that are not a market for ISPs, the incumbents. So for us, it's a matter of trying to. I think we're doing a lot of the learning for people right now. So we do have a public initiative that's kind of I'd say it's public-private in the city of Detroit. That's meant to be a digital equity mechanism, and that's still spinning up because digital equity was not a stated priority of the city government until last year. So we're looking at how we can leverage some of our private sector partnerships right now to get some numbers together on what it costs to actually do small scale fiber runs to the home in an area where our anchors have really strong relationships with not only multi-generational homes, but also business owners, schools, churches, et cetera, so that we can potentially kind of leverage this opportunity to access existing fiber to create some jobs and to create an ownership within that neighborhood so that they're actually deciding what sustainability means for them with insights, of course, from our technological partners, because obviously fiber is really expensive. So that is something that we're working on this year with support from the National Science Foundation to understand not only how much this is going to cost to do it in this way, but also how our digital stewardship model can actually speak more so to the sustainability, I suppose, of the end users. Because we're looking at folks that in many cases will be first-time users of this technology, but we're trying to understand what the impacts are in terms of their abilities to access telehealth, to search for jobs and participate in the economies, but overall how they can do that in a way that's both furthering their participation, furthering their access to education, et cetera. So I don't necessarily have a concrete answer other than partnerships are huge for us. We work in coalition on the ground level, but it's also imperative that we have cross-cultural, cross-sector participation because what we hear repeatedly is that there's an understanding that this is a truly an equity issue and not necessarily just one of innovation. So yeah, for us, we're looking at how we can hit sustainability goals in terms of network functionality, but also in terms of the social fabric of our neighborhoods. So maybe I'll have to follow up with you on that.
No, that's an excellent answer, because I think that's the best answer. You're essentially saying, look, there is need. We are demand driven. We will continue to service demand, and we will find resources to make it happen and do it with the right partners. Right? We can't know the future. So I think that's a very powerful answer, and I think we need more of these projects all around the country. I'm getting the hook, but if we have Elaine and Karina, if you have a sentence or two you'd like to close with, then we'll throw it back to Dan. Go ahead, Elaine.
Sure. I guess I would just say, I think our focus on one place, Chicago, has been a huge strength of our work because it's allowed those relationships to develop and for us to kind of be a hub for relationships in different sectors so that people can work together better, but also so that we have institutional memory and we can make connections, over time and across different kind of sectors in a way that I think researchers who do a study on this here and a study on that there can't. So I think that's been really helpful for us as researchers and also for our usefulness for the city.
That has come through very clearly. Thank you, Elaine. I love it. Karina, you get the last word.
Great, thank you so much. Well, I think I just want to reiterate the importance of, partnering with the local institutions. I think kind of along the same lines as Elaine, and making a commitment to have science-based and foreign policy be in the driver's seat. and continue working and leveraging, and then also, you know, putting that, adding the same weight of the community voices into that. So thank you.
Thanks, Karina. Thank you all for sharing your work. What an amazing set of projects and also an amazing panel. So thank you, all three of you. You were magnificent. Dan, back to you with apologies.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all so much. I feel like I'm just going to say the exact same words that Dan just said, right? What a fantastic panel. What a fantastic set of projects, and so much learned. We don't have time for me to give any wrap-up notes, which someone who works for me is very happy with that, because I rarely am short for words, but learned so much from this. Thank you to all four of you for your generosity of time and expertise in really kind of sharing your work with us, and letting us learn from you. I think there's a lot that we can build off of here in Boston. And Dan, thank you so much for, you know, being our intrepid leader in this conversation, which, you know, linking these three projects together, while in some ways obvious, also very challenging. So thank you so much. So with that, it's my job to just tell everyone who is sticking around for the next sessions. They start at 11. If panelists can jump over to those in the next few minutes, that would be great, so we can just make sure tech is all set up. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. The conversation doesn't matter unless you're all part of it and watching, and thanks to those in the Q&A. And again, Dan, Elaine, Karina, Katie, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to continuing conversations with you in the future.
Bye. Thanks so much.
Have a great one.